want to talk to you about Santa Claus. And I know what date it is in the calendar, but I do want to speak about that in the synagogue this evening. Because we know the legend of Santa Claus. He flies from his home at the North Pole on Christmas Eve to bring toys and gifts to children. The happy white bearded man is dressed in red, and he usually flies on a sleigh led by his reindeer, and Santa enters each home through the chimney and fills children's stockings with toys and gifts. Basically, that's the story. And I know Santa Claus was St. Nicholas, who was a 4th century religious leader. Who cares about any of that? I don't care about that. Okay, so there's an important religious issue relating to Santa Claus. What is it? It's totally crazy. It's totally crazy. There's no logic to it whatsoever. But children are indoctrinated with it. Parents guard the indoctrination. I remember my son Noam. Jane, was he like in a supermarket or something? He was at a supermarket. He was a little kid, and I don't know. Noam is Noam. Noam went up to a kid and said, "Oh, there's no Santa Claus," and the mother almost killed us. No, seriously. Do you remember that? Okay. Now, is this indoctrination is good? Is it healthy? And people worry about this. Will the truth destroy my child's fantasy world? Now, in the New York Times, which you know I read very carefully, on November 20th, there were 2 psychologists who wrote this really interesting article about the belief in Santa Claus. And you can go and Google it, you can find it, but there's a really interesting paragraph that I want to share with you. It says, they said, and I quote, about half the children, about 20% of adults, reported feeling good about discovering the truth about Santa. Some said they were relieved that they finally had resolution to some of their nagging questions. Others reported pride, as if they'd solved a complicated puzzle. Others report pride. Research found that people's emotional responses were less negative upon learning the truth if they felt they figured things out themselves. Now, this is amazing and important. They felt relieved by hearing the truth. Now, why hide the truth? What is the value of promoting a silly story that is totally against logic? I mean, as a kid, I would think about this. I would say, oh man, how does Santa go from each house? How does he get down the chimney? And let me tell you, I was a good Jewish kid, and we didn't have Christmas in our house, but very frequently in my life, I would go into the living room in the morning, and I prayed that there was going to be something there. I did. It didn't happen, but okay. But it's totally, why create a problem that should not be a problem? Making God a magician does not make me more faithful. It turns Judaism for me into a joke. Now, let me give you an example why I'm raising this issue. Look at our Torah portion for the Shabbat. And it's true from last week's Torah portion, and it'll be true for next week's Torah portion. It's a remarkably important story, the foundation of the Jewish people. Last week we read of the first 7 plagues. This week we read the last 3 plagues: locusts, darkness, and the killing of the firstborn. We also read that the Israelites were protected from the 10th plague because they put the blood of the Paschal Lamb on their doors. And if you want a good example of that, watch the movie with Charlton Heston, The 10 Commandments. I love the way they do the angel of death. It's totally crazy, but it's really fun to watch. Now, what is the deep meaning of our portion? It's about standing up to a tyrant, Pharaoh, a dictator, a fascist, a liar. It's a classic statement against right versus wrong. God is, in the story of Passover in our portion, God is the liberator who seeks freedom for Israel. It's a story of profound leadership and courage. Moses must show bravery in spite of his inner doubts. And it's a chutzpah story. Who is Moses to stand before Pharaohs? Sometimes we need to have chutzpah to stand bigger than we really are. And it is through this story that the birth of the Jewish people emerges. Only coming out of Egypt do the Israelites become a nation. It's a story that shows us every year when we read it this Shabbat, we'll read it during Passover. It is a story of liberation, that God is the power and force in the world that makes us capable of fighting for freedom and achieving it. Nevertheless, but the magic of the story, and I'm speaking autobiographical. All of you can say everything I say is ridiculous. I don't care. Okay. I'm telling you what I struggle with in this, okay? The magic of the story turns me off. It's embarrassing to me. It goes against my natural commitment to reason and to science. The emphasis on God's miraculous power in this story, the idea that God is this power that enters history and does things which appear contrary to natural law and reason, they alienate me. They don't bring me toward religion. They turn me off to religion. Is the story great science fiction, or is it good religion? Everything in Judaism is about the affirmation that there's a natural order. This is not a radical idea. If religion is not based on reason, how can we take it seriously? Our kids go to school. They study physics, mathematics, astronomy, biology. Everly, someday you will do that. Okay? And then we want them to believe in the second plague that frogs come out of the Nile. I cannot believe in a God who violates the laws of nature. And frogs jumping out of the Nile does not convince me to be a Jew. Indeed, for me, the laws of nature are the proof of God. And the divine plan behind nature is a reflection of God's wisdom and benevolence. When you reject reason, when you create something that doesn't make any sense, you're not bringing me personally towards religion. You're saying that religion is a silly religion. And what we're asked to do, I think, in Judaism is not take the Torah literally, but to understand that it's a story that is telling us something profound. But if you read it literally and you take everything it says exactly the way the Torah says it does, and says, if you don't read it that way, there's something wrong with you, you're making a foolish tale out of a Torah when it's here to teach us the highest, most noble principles that any civilization could ever want. The rabbis struggle with this idea of basing religion on magic. We are told in the Mishnah, which is the first code of Jewish law written after the Torah was written, it talks about reciting a vain prayer. In other words, a prayer that you cry to God about the past. For example, 2 illustrations are given. One is where a man's wife is pregnant, and he prays that the child she is carrying should be a boy. The other, why does that make no sense? It's already been decided. I'm going to teach you the birds and the bees at another time. The baby is made. You can't pray whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. Is that complicated? Do you see my reasoning? Okay, good. The other is where a man hears from afar the sound of crying and prays that the sound should not be one that proceeds from his own house. In other words, if there's It's like the example given, if you hear a fire engine, you can pray, I hope it's not my house. It's already been decided. Am I right or wrong? In both instances, prayer is futile since the event has already taken place. Miracles, magic can't change what's happened in the past. Now, Mordecai Kaplan, my spiritual hero, was obsessed with this idea. And one of the things that he taught was that religion that's rooted in supernaturalism is a religion that he couldn't find compelling. And I don't either. And he wrote the following, which I think kind of articulates what I'm thinking of and what I'm trying to share with you this evening. It says, with their limited knowledge of reality, the ancients regarded miracles or occasions for suspending the laws of nature not only as possible, but as a necessary means to experience the reality of God. On the other hand, modern man cannot help but regard the suspension of the natural law as unsubstantiated. More than that, he cannot, with his present knowledge of reality, find in such a conception of God the support he requires to face life with an attitude of responsibility, humility, and fortitude. Let me make it very simple. You're flying in an airplane, and all of a sudden God decides that the laws of aerodynamics no longer exist. What do you think of that? You do not want to be in that airplane. So we can't want the laws of nature to work here and not work over there. This is what I spend all night thinking about all the time. The traditional belief in miracles is an enemy of religion. Kaplan believes that people leave Judaism because they find it not intellectually compelling. Some people embrace this supernaturalism, which is fine. But the people that I deal with mostly in my rabbinical career have been people who have said, you know something? The things that I was taught as a kid don't make sense. My religion must not make any sense. I can't tell you how many times confirmation students have come into class and they've said, you know, Rabbi, how do didn't you read the book of Genesis that the world was created in 6 days and God rests on the seventh day? God rests on the seventh day? Don't you believe in science? And I turned to them, I said, I've never heard about science. That's a new one to me. Now, friends, let me give you an example of what I think our tradition really teaches. There are miracles in the Jewish tradition, but they're not miracles of the laws of nature being suspended. The miracles is that the laws of nature actually exist. And I'll give you an example. There's a blessing when you hear thunder and lightning. It's a blessing. What's the blessing? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oseh ma'aseh v'reshit. God has created a world. Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who performs the works of creation. Nature is beautiful. The laws of nature are beautiful. The way the world unfolds is beautiful. It's all miraculous. Now let's get back to Santa Claus and replace it with a Jewish reference. I have a basic belief that we should never teach a child anything that we must later unteach them, if there's such a word. And that's how I raised our kids. That's how Jane and I raised our kids. We would not teach them anything that we didn't believe as an adult. We never wanted to be in a situation where we had to unteach them this. So this is what we would tell them. And obviously we didn't tell them like it was a lecture in physics at a college, but we transmitted it, I think, in a pretty realistic way. What we would say is that God is found in nature. Isn't rain amazing? Aren't flowers growing amazing? Isn't it amazing that you and I grow up and we change? Praying to God is not about requesting something. It's an expression of something being important. There's much we do that we don't. There is much we do not know about God, But God is not a person. God is a power. God is not going to punish you. The Torah is not from heaven. It was written by people, very smart people. The 10 plagues is a beautiful story, but the events actually didn't happen. And what was the end result of my theological parenting? Well, both of my kids are Jewish, who in their own way take Judaism seriously. My grandchildren, hopefully, will be raised like that. We don't believe in our house that God is a magician. And I think that we've raised our children more like this than we raised them like this. And I think they have more respect for religion than they would have if we had done it another way. You don't have to lie to kids about things, and we as parents and we as adults, we pretend. If you don't believe, look, if you believe that if you believe the sea parted and the Israelites walked through, tell your kids that. But if you don't believe it, don't teach your kids that. That makes no sense. We don't have to lie to them about things, and later they're going to say, this religion doesn't make any sense. We need to save Judaism, in my opinion, from the irrational. Read what's happening among the evangelicals. We should be frightened. There are evangelicals who are saying that Donald Trump is the Messiah. And that wasn't a political statement, that's a religious statement. Let's enjoy the Exodus story for what it is, a beautiful religious tradition. It's not an historical truth, it's inspirational. But we do not have to disconnect our brains when we become serious Jews. Just the opposite. We are called upon to reattach our brains. Let's be nice to our brains. Shabbat shalom.